Fairy tales are a big part of our childhoods. They continue on generation after generation, teaching lessons and sparking our imaginations. And they always have a happy ending. Or do they? As it turns out, the true stories behind the fairy tales that you remember as a child are not so happy and are a lot darker. Today we're going to dive into the true stories behind the happy fairy tales that you remember as a kid. Warning, this might ruin your childhood. Here are 7 horrific fairy tale origins that will ruin your childhood. Number 7 is Pinocchio. The classic character of Pinocchio first appeared in The Adventures of Pinocchio in 1883 by Italian writer Carlo Collodi of Florence, Tuscany. The Disney classic that came out in 1940 was of course based on this story about a wooden doll who became a real boy, but they left out some important elements that would have made it less than kid-friendly. The premise of the movie is the same as the original story, but unlike the Disney version, the true original portrayed a Pinocchio that is almost villainous. In the opening chapters, Pinocchio, tired of Jiminy Cricket's moralizing and advice, gets so angry that he actually kills Jiminy by throwing a hammer at him. And what's worse is that he doesn't even show any remorse for doing so. But the dark details that were omitted don't stop there. There are more recent versions of the story where Pinocchio has his feet burned off soon after he runs away for the first time. Then there's the part where Pinocchio steals some gold coins, gets caught, and is hanged for his crimes. And finally, Collodi originally intended the story to end with the puppet hanging from a tree dying as a powerful tale of morality for young readers. But his editors forced him to write a happy ending, as the book would not have been marketable with Collodi's ending. Number 6 is The Pied Piper. The classic children's story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin dates all the way back to the Middle Ages and is known worldwide. But it's unlikely as a kid that you ever actually considered just how dark this story is, and you certainly never knew about its true dark origins. The story centers on the real-life small town of Hamelin in Germany. In the story, the residents of the town are struggling with an overrun of rats. One day, a rat catcher in multicolored or pied clothing arrives and offers to drive all the rats away for a price. The townsfolk agree to pay the man if he drives the rats away, so the piper plays his music and all the rats follow him out of the town to the river where they all drown. But despite doing his job, the townsfolk don't pay him, and so in anger he plays his pipe again, except this time he draws all the children out of the town where, let's just say, they're never seen again. More disturbingly, in more modern versions, the townfolk actually give in and pay him in order to have their children returned to them. But in the earliest tellings, things are much darker, where he does to the children exactly what he did to the rats, and in others makes all of them join in an army and fight in the Crusades. Number 5 is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The classic story of Snow White was popularized in the 1937 animated musical created by Disney. It became an instant classic and was labeled as a masterpiece, and was part of what made Disney a household name. And we all remember it as such, but the original story of Snow White dates back to 1812 and is based on the German fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm that is much darker. In both Disney's version and the original, Snow White's wicked stepmother, the evil queen, becomes jealous of her beauty and wants her dead. But unlike the Disney version, where she gives Snow White an apple, the original story has her ask a hunter to take Snow White into the forest and kill her, just so she can be the fairest of them all. But the differences don't stop there. The evil queen also won't be satisfied until the hunter brings her back the lungs and liver of Snow White as proof of her death. But the hunter can't go through with it, so he brings the queen back the organs of a wild boar, after which the queen promptly eats them. Yeah, just let that sink in for a second. When the prince and Snow White finally wed, unlike the Disney version, the original has the prince command that the evil queen be put in burning hot iron shoes, where she will dance until she's dead. Number 4 is Cinderella. The story of Cinderella actually has thousands of variants throughout the world, dating as far back as somewhere between 7 BC and AD 23. You likely remember the popular 1950s Disney animated classic about a young young girl from a poor background who overcomes adversity and evil relatives to become a princess. But that's the version meant for kids. The real story by the Brothers Grimm in 1812 is less than kid-friendly. The premise of Cinderella being kept practically as a slave by her jealous evil stepsisters, as well as being barred from going to the prince's ball, are the same. But that's largely where the similarities stop. There is no fairy godmother in the original story, but instead, Cinderella prays to a tree that she planted by her mother's grave that grants her wishes. It's the tree by her dead mother that grants her a gown and slippers to wear to the ball. And instead of losing her slipper, the evil stepsisters concoct grisly ways to convince the prince that they're meant for him. One stepsister cuts off her toe in order to fit it into her shoe, and the other cuts off her own heel. And if that wasn't bad enough, when their attempts to stand between Cinderella and the prince are discovered, the stepsisters' eyes are pecked out by birds. The end. Number 3 is Little Red Riding Hood. This classic tale can be traced all the way back to Europe in the pre-17th century. The story has been retold and changed many times, especially in modern adaptations, including the one that you know as a child. But as you've already guessed, the version you know isn't the original tale, which is far darker. We all remember her as a young girl who wears a red hooded cloak and gets stalked by a wolf on the way to see her grandmother. Now, in the version that you remember, the wolf eats the grandmother whole and then dresses as her and waits in bed. But in the original and one of the best known versions by Charles Perrault and the Brothers Grimm, there is no happy ending to this story. In Perrault's version, the girl strips naked before getting into bed, meant to be a morality tale warning girls of wily seducers. But the Brothers Grimm version is far more disturbing. There were no sexual or moral overtones, but instead the wolf actually serves Little Red Riding Hood pieces of her own grandmother to eat. Number 2 is Rapunzel. Yet another classic from our childhoods based on European fairy tales. The story of Rapunzel is one of the best known children's stories of all time. It was made famous by the Brothers Grimm at the start of the 19th century and of course became a Disney movie that all ages could enjoy. But the truth is, the story you've heard omits dark details that exist in the original story. As you might remember, the story is about a princess locked in a tower who was imprisoned there as a baby after her father was caught stealing medicinal herbs from the evil witch's garden. Over the years, her hair grows longer and longer to the point where a passing prince hears Rapunzel singing from her window, who then climbs up to meet her using her hair as a rope. When the witch learns of her romance, she cuts off Rapunzel's hair and uses it to entice the prince up to the tower, but when he reaches the window, the witch pushes the poor prince, where he falls and impales his eyes on thorny rose bushes. You're not going to see that part in the Disney movie. What's also left out is that this is actually based on real-world examples that actually happened. In medieval Europe, women were often locked up in towers or castle cells as punishment for crimes of male relatives. A disturbing fact you never learned as a kid. And number 1 is Sleeping Beauty. Of all the fairy tales we heard as kids, perhaps none has darker origins than that of Sleeping Beauty. The earliest known version of this tale was found in the narrative Perceforest, written between 1330 and 1344, but in modern times, of course, was popularized by Disney in their 1959 animated film. The story is about a beautiful young woman asleep in a castle who cannot be woken, but that's where the similarities end between the version that you know and the true version. In the original, it's a king, not a prince, who discovers Sleeping Beauty, and instead of giving her a kiss, the king carries her to a large bed and does something unmentionable. After that event, she gives birth to twins, and only when they start feeding from her does she awaken. Yeah, let all that sink in. And if that wasn't horrifying enough, in addition to all that, the king was a married man in the original version, so the queen, after hearing of the illegitimate children, not only wants them killed, but thinks of a way to make her husband eat them. In the end, the queen's plan doesn't work, the royal couple separates, and the king ends up marrying Sleeping Beauty, where they live happily ever after. Yep, childhood ruined. But thank you for watching this, and if you want to catch my next upload, remember to subscribe on YouTube and follow my Facebook. I post my videos on both platforms. I have almost 1,000 videos, so wherever you're watching this, feel free to browse through them because there's guaranteed to be something just for you. I'll see you next week and over on Twitch where I'm live every single day. Take care.